What a great way to end up. Look what we've all got to look forward to. It is great to be back here with you. I love this church. And as you know, Leanne and I have been away for a fair bit of this year. And we have missed being here with you. We love this church. We love... And when we're talking about church, we're talking about you, the people. We're not talking about all the things that go around with it. There is plenty of other things that we don't miss, but we do miss all of you greatly, and it is good to be here. It is great to see the fantastic things that are happening in this church, and I really want to affirm Norman and the staff leaders and every leader for the incredible things that you're doing, and of continuing the vision forward of being an open, welcoming community for people to come into, to be discipled in our walk with God, and to be inviting new people to become followers of Jesus. This is what is truly important, and I really believe that you are all doing a fantastic job and appreciate it greatly. Well, I don't know about you, but have you ever had the experience of going away on a trip for a few days? And as you're preparing, you're running around getting all the things that you need to go on your trip, packing them into the suitcase. And if you're anything like me, it's a little bit of a rush. You know that you have to be at the airport. What is it, like 45 minutes beforehand? What is it with that? And you're racing around getting all of these things. And as you drive out the driveway, you suddenly start thinking, what have I forgotten? I'm sure I've forgotten something. What have I forgotten? Well, the thing is, when you are a pastor and you leave a church, you start to suddenly have all of these terrible thoughts. What have I forgotten to share? What have we not conveyed in a very powerful way that needs to be conveyed? And I've really thought about this, and I thought, this is a topic that we haven't dealt with enough. And today I really want us to think carefully about it. It's hugely important. I believe it is critically important for us that as a church we live and die together. And so I would like us to jump straight into this. We have got a lot to go through today, and I'd like us to begin where it matters most, in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 20. And I'd like to invite you to take out your Bible. I haven't put all these verses up on the screen because I really want you to read it with me, to read the story. And it is found in Genesis chapter 20 on page 13 of your Bible, right at the beginning. Genesis, I have been reading a lot of the stories in Genesis this year, and I believe that every significant understanding that God wants for us comes right out of the book of Genesis. And so if everyone has found the page, Genesis chapter 20, we're going to start reading that this morning. It is entitled in the NASB, Abraham's Treachery. I don't know if you know the meaning of the word treachery. Betrayal of trust, disloyalty, unfaithfulness, infidelity, dirty tricks. That's what the word means. And so it says in verse 1 that Abraham moved south to the Negev, and he lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur, and then he moved on to Gerar. While living there as a foreigner, Abraham introduced his wife Sarah by saying, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. All right, the first question. Abraham introduces Sarah by saying, "She is my sister." Is that a very good introduction? And I want to ask the women, this question. If you are married to someone, how would you feel if you are introduced as, "This is my sister"? Most women I know would be pretty unimpressed with that kind of an introduction. In fact, I think I'd be in the dog box for a long time. Now, technically, what Abraham says about Sarah is also true. She is sort of his sister. And we won't go into all the details of that. But even when you convey something that is technically correct with the intention to deceive, what do we call that? A big fat lie. And that's exactly what Abraham is doing in this story. So why does he do it? Well, just a few pages earlier, we are told that Sarah was a very, very beautiful woman. And Abraham feared that when someone of a higher authority, in this case it's a king, when a king sees her, the first thing that they're going to do is to have Abraham finished off, killed, and they would take Sarah to be their own wife. So at this point of the story, we find Abraham is waiting at home while Sarah is at the king's palace, and we all know what is about to happen next. Can you imagine being Abraham at home, knowing that any minute the king is about to have sex with his wife? Yes, I'm going to say it like that, and we're going to be quite blunt this morning. That's exactly what was going to happen. And Abraham is waiting there knowing that this is about to happen. How would you feel if you were him, waiting helplessly while his wife is being taken? So because Abraham is such a wimp, and let's say it for what it is, he's not the strong, protective husband that a wife needs and looks up to, someone who she should be able to respect and honor. We find what? We find that God has to come and intervene in the story. God comes in to save the situation from being the disaster that it is about to be. Verse 3, it says, "But that night God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, 'You are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is what? Is already married.'" I want you to say it with me. It's up on the screen. "You are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married." Now turn to the person next to you. This is going to be a reflective listening exercise, and I want the person next to you to tell you what they are hearing when they hear this phrase. Put it into modern language. What are you hearing when you hear the words, "You are a dead man, for this woman that you have taken is already married"? All right, is that long enough? Who's going to call out what someone said? Have we got a good translation of this into modern language? You're in deep trouble, absolutely. You are in deep trouble. Someone else? I want to hear the impact of this. You are a dead man. You're going to be a dead man. Yes, you're going to be dead in lots of ways. That is very, very true. Here are a couple of mine. "If you have sex with her, I will kill you." Do you want it South Auckland style? This is not recommended. "You touch my girl, I smash your face." So are we getting the impact of what's happening in this story? Is this coming through to you loud and clear? Verse 4, but Abimelech had not slept with her yet, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Didn't Abraham tell me she is my sister? And she herself said, yes, he is my brother. I acted in complete innocence. My hands are clean. In the dream, God responded, yes, I know you are innocent. That's why I kept you from sinning against me and why I did not let you touch her. Now return the woman to her husband, and he will pray for you, for he is a prophet. Then you will live. Don't you love this contrast between death and life in this story? But if you don't return her to him, you can be sure that you and all your people will die. Abimelech got up early the next morning and he quickly called all his servants together. When he told them what had happened, his men were terrified. Then Abimelech called for Abraham. What have you done to us? He demanded. What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing? Whatever possessed you to do such a thing? We're going to leave the story here because the big point I want us to see is this reaction that comes back from Abimelech and his servants. It says that the servants were terrified. Really? Would they be terrified? Why would they be terrified? What would warrant such a reaction? Abraham gets called in to explain in this story. And notice what Abimelech says. What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? Now, whose words are these? Is this God's words? This is Abimelech's words. Do you know who Abimelech was? Abimelech is what we would refer to as a pagan king. Someone who is not a follower of God. Someone who, I guess, Abraham and his family thought was corrupted. And yet, what is Abimelech saying about this in the story? I want you to hear this. Making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin. It's not only him, it's everyone. We're all in it together. It seems to me that God takes adultery very seriously. And it's not only God that takes adultery seriously, it's even pagan kings like Abimelech. In the NIV Bible commentary on Genesis, it says this. It says, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia and Canaan, adultery is regularly referred to as the great sin. It is considered extremely detrimental to society to the extent that it is characteristic of anarchy. Can you believe that? Hittite laws, Middle Assyrian laws, and the Code of Hammurabi all contain legislation against adultery. Now, what I want us to notice is that all of these places are considered to be the places that are the height, the pinnacle of paganism. And yet even they felt that adultery was extremely detrimental to society and is the characteristic of anarchy. How would it be in our time, in our culture, if the same thing were to happen? I want us to think about that because, of course, this happens every single day. People seem to think there's absolutely nothing wrong with sleeping with another man's wife. Well, so they say. If Abimelech lived in New Zealand in 2012, I wonder whether he would have responded differently. I wonder whether it would have been like this. Why, God? Why would I be a dead man? Really? Come on, no harm is done. It's okay for me to have sex with Sarah. Why shouldn't I? Sex is for fun. Sex is for my enjoyment. And I can have sex with whoever I feel like whenever I want. What are you talking about, God? Well, she is married to someone else, isn't she? Once upon a time, that used to be called adultery. We don't seem to use the word much anymore because it sounds a little bit drastic, doesn't it? And while the story doesn't go into all the reasons of why adultery is the great sin, it certainly does give us the impression that both God and Abimelech and all of his people thought that adultery was a very serious issue. Today I want to take a little bit of time to explore why I believe that it is such a serious issue. You know, in the beginning of time, when God first creates Adam, it tells us in Genesis chapter 2 that for some short period of time that Adam was on his own. Then at some point it says he lay down to have a sleep, and during this little rest, God performed a little operation on him. In fact, it was quite a major operation. I wouldn't suggest that any of us try this, but he extracted the hip from Adam, and it says that out of this hip he creates an even more beautiful and magnificent human being, and he calls them a woman. And when Adam first saw Eve, as she is later called, it records what Adam says. And it says that Adam goes, "Wow, this is bone of my bone and flesh from my flesh." And then a little commentary is given, perhaps it is from God, that says this: "This explains why a man leaves his father and his mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one." Two are united into one. This seems to be God's big plan right from the beginning. This is the idea that is supposed to be encapsulated in this word that we call marriage. And yet the word today has lost a huge amount of its original meaning and intention. Marriage is supposed to be the idea of two different and completely separate human beings being united together and becoming one person. Becoming one. In our context, if you like, it's supposed to look like this. He says, "I promise to love and to honor and to cherish this woman, to keep myself wholly and entirely for you from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, all of the days of my life until." She says, "I promise to love and to honor and to respect this man, to keep myself wholly and entirely for him from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, all the days of my life until" what? "Until death do us part." This is what it looks like for two to be joined into one. It's a big promise, isn't it? It's a huge promise. It's also a commitment that should endure for all of life. Yes, the big definition of marriage is that it is a loving, committed relationship that endures throughout one's entire life. Some people are worried about other definitions of marriage. This is what marriage is about. It is for life. All the days of my life until death do us part. Marriage is for life. Some have called it a life sentence. But as the beautiful couple stands at the front of the church, as they look into each other's eyes and as they look out over the congregation, I think that they are looking for way more than a life sentence. They're looking for love, unconditional love that will last throughout the rest of their life. For two to become one. So why would anyone want to become one flesh, one person with another human being? Isn't that a good question to ask? Why would anyone want to do that, especially in our day, in this very individualistic society? Well, it is the place to experience what is called unconditional love. It is the one place where you are supposed to be able to experience completely unconditional love. No matter what happens, there is one person in this world that will love me for all of my life. Now, I know it doesn't always work out that way, but this is the place where we're meant to experience what God is like, to experience the unconditional love of God, both in the giving of it aspect, the giving unconditional love to another human being, and the receiving of it, the receiving of unconditional love from another human being. This is really what helps us to understand what true agape love is really like. Now, of course, it's not necessarily easy, and sometimes it is particularly hard. We all know that, anyone who is married. And yet, it is the best thing, all at the same time. And so God invented this physical experience that we call sex to be a special bond, a physical binding together of intense pleasure that would help to create unique oneness and emotional bonding between a man and a woman. Right from the beginning, God makes it abundantly clear, both in the story that we've just read and in many other stories, that the experience of sex must be saved only for marriage. In fact, God intervenes directly in several places. One is in the story that we've just read. The marriage union of two becoming one is something that God would want to be honored between two people. And God makes it very clear that adultery would break, it would shatter this special bond that is to be maintained between two people who have made a marriage covenant and vow to each other to become one. And that adultery would cause pain and anguish not only for the two of them, but for so many people who are closest to them. So today, I would like to share a story which illustrates one aspect of this, but a very important aspect of why I believe one of the reasons that God asks us to experience, to keep the experience of sex just for marriage. And this is called the parable of the man who forgot to make a determined choice. Warning: the characters in this story are purely fictitious. Any representation of true life is purely intentional. It goes like this. Carter had only very recently started coming to Papster Church. His family had just moved up from Christchurch and he was going to complete his year 12 and 13 in Auckland. After his first week at Papster, where he joined in with a 360 group, he knew that he would be back. The girls there are pretty hot, and he was hoping to be in for his share of the action. What he didn't know was that the young people at 360 talked and discussed about all kinds of topics, and nearly all of them were choosing to make God-honoring decisions in their lives. But Carter didn't really care about that. Carter's view of the world at 16 was to make the most of life while you can. When I'm 17, my life will be over, he thought. So let's not waste any time enjoying it all right now as much as he could. Carter had not really thought a lot about his future years. Yes, he had some vague idea that someday it would be great to have a family. Perhaps one day he would have a wife and some children. Perhaps this would be, but that's far off in the future, he thought. As for now, life is for living it up as much as I can. I'm only 16 once, he repeated aloud again to himself. A couple of people from 360 had invited him to intersections that was happening in 2 weeks' time, but he thought that would be rather suspect. If they're going to be talking about sex at church, he assumed that they would be talking about no sex at church, and that was certainly not what he had in his mind, at least not for the next few years. So instead of going to intersections, he decided to see if he could hook up with a good-looking girl for the weekend. That's what Saturday nights are for, he thought. And it so happened that a girl named Anna, who was just 15, had been told by one of her friends at school that the best way to enjoy sex was to do it for the first time with someone that you don't really like. That way, the reasoning went, she wouldn't get hurt so much by having a bad experience losing her virginity, as so many of her friends did, with a guy who didn't care much for them. And so when Carter asked her out on that fateful Saturday night, they both sort of lost their virginity in the back seat of his old Mazda and at the top of what was once One Tree Hill. The adrenaline and the hormones were flowing, and there was plenty of the physical. But to be honest, neither one cared very much about the other. And true to expectation, Anna didn't have a very good experience. Neither did he, for that matter, and he wanted to make up for it with something a bit better than that. He didn't really ever speak to Anna again after that. So now that he sort of knew what to do, Carter decided that he would try and hook up with a girl who really knew how to make it happen. Over the course of the next 6 months, he managed to get it happening with 3 other girls, and each time the whole experience left him feeling not completely satisfied and wanting more. About 8 years later, something changed. Perhaps it was that he had grown up a little more, who knows, but there was a girl named Lucy who he really started to like. She was beautiful and also had a charm about her that really made him like her. He decided that she might really be the one that he could live with and perhaps even have kids with. After just a few weeks, the relationship turned sexual, and they did more sex than talking. This suited Carter well, and they seemed to be very suited to each other. Lucy was not entirely sure that this was going to work out, as every now and again they would have a rather heated disagreement, and Carter would go all quiet on her for a few days. But generally, having sex again would get everything back on track. And when Carter proposed to her, after a year and a half of going out, despite her uneasiness and misgivings about him, she wondered if she would find anyone better, and so she said yes. As the time of the wedding approached, Carter started to think more about life after marriage. He had always thought that once he got married, he wouldn't be sleeping around anymore. That wouldn't be fair to Lucy, he thought. So I guess I should make the most of it while I still can. Julia was Lucy's best friend, and she had asked her to be her maid of honor. As they were spending more time together planning the wedding, Carter got to see a lot more of her too. She was very attractive. And when Lucy was out of earshot, Carter made a few passes at Julia. Julia enjoyed the attention, she was flattered by it, and responded to his advances, and before you knew it, Julia was just another one of the many girls that Carter had notched up. The wedding day was almost everything that Lucy had hoped for. Magnificent weather, some amazing photos, and so many friends all around to enjoy the experience. For Carter, it was a great day too, except he expected something to happen. It didn't. The next morning, he woke up exactly the same as he had been 2 days before the wedding. The sex with Lucy was the same as it had always been. Other women looked just as attractive and exciting as they had before he had got married, and somehow Carter didn't get that needed brain transplant on his wedding day that would suddenly make him to be a faithful husband. 3 years on, after they were married, they had an almost 2-year-old boy and a brand new little baby girl. Life was full on, and most nights they got very little sleep, certainly none of what they used to have. So when a work conference came up and he was away for 3 days one week, the almost expected happened. His wandering eyes continued to, and he couldn't help but notice the delightful but very dangerous curves of the other women. By the second night, he had one of his work colleagues from another city in his bed with him. No one will ever know, he thought, and it's only just this once, because I'm not getting it at home, he thought. But work conferences continued to happen, and so did his liaisons. Soon it was not just when he was away at conferences. Sometimes he stayed late after work, and he enjoyed more than the company of some of his co-workers. And then it happened. One day, Lucy discovered a text from her best friend Julia on Carter's phone. "How could you?" she exploded. But then again, how could he not? It wasn't that he had planned to cheat on her. It was that he had never made a determined choice not to. The divorce was messy, most of all for the kids who ended up during the weeks with mum and with dad most weekends. It was hard on them, and Carter felt it painfully. Not only did their tender faces look more sullen than before, it was devastating for Lucy. Not only had she lost Carter, she had lost her hopes and dreams for a happy family, and she had lost her best friend, Julia. Life was lonely. Life was not really worth living. And while a story like this comes to an end, in real life, it continues on. Life that is a seemingly unending trail of relational destruction caused by just one individual who didn't make a determined choice to choose to live life the way that would bring happiness instead of pain, sorrow, and loneliness. So all I want to say to you today is this. Don't expect to land up in the right destination if you are flying a course in the opposite direction. If your destination is a deeply loving relationship with your spouse and you want your kids to grow up in a family where they are loved by and spend good quality time with both of their parents, then you're probably not going to get to that place by having sex with whoever you want when you are young. It's true of everything in life, but it is especially true in this relational area. Every choice of your life today seriously affects your future happiness, together with the happiness of your future spouse and your children. No one experiences a thought or mind makeover on their wedding night. It suddenly makes them faithful. It's just not how life works, is it? If you have sex before you're married, the odds are pretty high that you will continue to have adulterous sex after you are married. I mean, think about it. Does sexual attraction finish on the day you get married? Of course not. Who you have sex with is a choice that you make, and it's a choice that needs to be made very early on in your life. And so today I'm urging every person, doesn't matter what age you are, doesn't matter your marital status, I want every person to choose, to make a commitment that you're only going to have sex with the person who you're married to. The first time you make an exception to that rule, the easier it is to happen the next time and the time after that. If you play with fire, what do you expect? Expect to get burnt. The tragedy is that not only do you get burnt, but that other people will also suffer the painful consequences of the choices that you make, of your sexual infidelity. And that is so much what God wants to save people from. Jesus came to save us from our sins. Jesus came to save us from hurting other women and children by urging us to marriage faithfulness. Now, I know some of you are asking another question. Yes, you say, I agree that it's not a good idea to have sex with any and everyone. But if I'm in a steady relationship with my boyfriend and we are committed and intend to get married, then why not now? I'm not going to answer the question, but I am going to ask you a series of questions, and they go like this. How committed are you? Has he asked you to marry him yet? Can you be certain that he will ask you to marry him? What if he changes his mind? What if you change your mind? Are you certain that this is the one who you will marry? Are you engaged yet? Why not? Are you married yet? Why not? And if there are doubts in your mind about any of these questions, then you are about to have sex with someone who may not be your future husband. So I would urge you to wait and save the sexual experience for the person who is your husband or wife. And the only way to be certain is to make the choice to get married before you do that. It's interesting to note that there is plenty of real-life evidence to support this theory. Statistics show that you are twice as likely to get divorced if you have sex before you get married. And as for the theory that unless you try it out, you won't know if you're sexually compatible, I want you just to think that through for a minute. The most likely cause of sexual incompatibility is if one or both have had previous defining sexual experiences. And while I'm not the one who can tell you from experience, my guess is that sex is not significantly better or worse from one married person to the next. However, there is plenty of documented evidence that sex between married people is significantly more enjoyable than between unmarried people. Enough of that. You don't need any more. At this point, we're going to make an about turn and head in a very different direction from where we have just come. I hope that we have strongly made the point that marriage is for life, that sex is only for marriage, and that there are excellent reasons for our own benefit, not for God's benefit, for our own benefit, and the benefit of the people who will be closest to us, of why we would not want to do that. But I'm keenly aware that in a group of people of this size, or of any size for that matter, followers of God or not, it will already be too late to save sex only for marriage. And I want to focus the rest of our time on perhaps the majority of people. If you have already had sex outside of marriage, is it too late? Should I just as well continue to fly in the direction that I'm going and see where I end up? Well, I think using the flying analogy is a very good one. If you just keep flying along without a plan, what's going to happen? The chances are pretty high you're going to run out of fuel and you're going to crash and burn. So I'm not recommending that you do that. The great thing is that if you are still flying, if you are still breathing, if you are still alive this morning, there is the possibility of doing something about the present situation that you are in. Getting back on track and in the direction of your only safe destination, rather than ending up the train wrecks that so many people end up in. And so, in the story of Jesus' life here on earth, we are told that one day there was a group of religious people, and they were found dragging a woman out into a public place. In fact, it was to the place where Jesus was talking to a large crowd of people. And it says that the woman that they had dragged out in front of the crowd had been caught in the very act of adultery. Yes, she had been having sex with someone else's husband. And these religious people had rushed in on her in the very act. I want you to imagine what this is like. And they're looking to have this woman humiliated in public. And so they bring her to Jesus. These religious people wanted blood. They wanted to see a public execution. And so they marched up to Jesus and they said, "The law of Moses says that we should stone a woman who has done such a terrible thing. What do you say, Jesus?" You see, it is most often religious people who miss the point of what adultery is all about. The reason that we would not want to commit adultery is not to be good. It's not to earn God's favor in some way. The reason is not just because God said so, don't do it, as was sometimes taught earlier on. The reason is not that people will look down on me. The reason that people shouldn't commit adultery is what? To avoid the pain and the suffering that goes along with it to many other people as well. And so while the religious people are looking for the largest and the sharpest stones with which they can inflict even more pain, they observe out of the corner of one of their eyes and they see Jesus is sitting down on the ground and he is writing with his finger. Perhaps it is the same finger that originally brought us into life. As they edge over to see what he is writing, they suddenly see that their own sexual sins are being written out in the sand. Jesus invites those who have not sinned to pick up and throw the first stone. Immediately, all of the men start to walk away, until it says that only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Jesus stood up and he said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. So there are two major points that I really want us to hear and understand in this incredible story that Jesus told. The first is this: there is not one of us who has not sinned in this area. Now, before you protest and say that you have never committed adultery, I want you to understand how Jesus views adultery. In Matthew 5, as he is teaching about the intentions of the law and the Ten Commandments in that great Sermon on the Mount, he makes the following staggering statement. He says, "You have heard the commandment that says, 'You must not commit adultery.' But I say, anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus' definition is this: even if you looked at a beautiful girl, even if you just wished that you could touch her, that you could be with her in a sexual way, then you have committed adultery with her in your heart. So now it's time for confession. Put up your hand if you have committed adultery. And I know that I have to put up my hand. Now, you don't need to actually put up your hand because I already know the answer, actually. At least 99% of males would have had to put up their hand. The rest of them are lying. For all the women, it's a little different, but it is mostly the same. Perhaps we would translate the verse this way: anyone who desires to be held and to be loved by another man, to have a deep emotional connection with him, has already committed adultery with him in her heart. So Jesus settles that issue. If we have all committed adultery already, then who are we? Who is any of us to cast judgment on any other person among us? Yes, they may have done something worse than I have. They may have done something that has greater consequences. But for the grace of God and His word to us, every single one of us would have done the same and worse. So how can any one of us condemn anyone else? No one is able to condemn the other because we have all sinned. The second big point is what Jesus says to the woman who has been caught in the very act of adultery. What does He say to her? Jesus says to her, "Neither do I condemn you," the only one who could. "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Jesus offers every one of us a clean start today. Doesn't matter what you've done. This is the incredible message, the good news of the gospel. Doesn't matter what has gone before, you have a complete and clean beginning today. You can choose to live life the way that God knows is best for you and for the people that you love. Go and sin no more. But there are three issues that we need to think about when we say these words, go and sin no more. The first is this: in this day and age, the internet delivers every variety of pornographic pictures and movies to anyone and everyone in just an instant. The world around us displays sexually enticing images at almost every turn. It is very easy. In fact, it is very easy to have a hidden sex life apart from your spouse. And when this becomes a part of your life, when it occupies a regular amount of your time and attention, it can very easily become something that gets a hold on you, and you cannot actually just stop it. It's called sexual addiction. And as with all addictions, you can't just stop now. If you're sexually addicted, you simply cannot go and sin no more. And again, in a group of this size, there will be a significant number of people who are sexually addicted. I would suggest to you that you cannot solve the problem on your own and that you will need help. You'll need the help of other people. The biggest problem of why people don't seek help is that they are embarrassed about what others will think when it is known that they are sexually addicted. And still some live in the delusional world that they can fix the problem on their own. Here's the choice. Is it better to suffer a little bit of embarrassment or to continue to hurt and cause suffering and pain to the people you love most? I'd venture to say that in a church environment of people who care for you, that it would be a safe place to honestly admit that you're a sinner in need of help because you're in good company here. Isn't church supposed to be the hospital for sinners? We all believe that we are sinners in need of transformation. And would it be surprising to find that we all struggle with sexual sin? Would that be a surprise? I pray and hope that every one of us in this community would be people following the example of Jesus and saying to those who are in adultery, "No, I do not condemn you. I am here to help. I am here to help you live a better life, as I hope that you are here to help me to live a better life as well." The second issue with go and sin no more relates to every single one of us, because according to Jesus' definition, we have all committed adultery. How? By lusting, by wishing we could be with someone else. Now, in Jesus' words, he says, if your eye causes you to sin, then gouge it out. Better to be in the kingdom with no eyes. Of course, I don't think Jesus meant that literally, because if he did, most of us would be wandering around blind. What Jesus means is that we need to agree on some positive choices that is going to help us to fly in the right direction towards our intended safe destination. Many writers on this topic call these hedges or boundaries. And the purpose of this message today is not to outline all of the hedges and boundaries that we need to have in place. We don't have time for that. But I do believe that they are hugely important and that every single one of us needs to make firm choices about what those things are going to be. And I urge every one of us to make a choice to put these boundaries clearly in our minds. And they are things like investing your best times and experiences with your spouse. Have the best times with them. Secondly, being careful what you dwell on. Is what I am doing building my relationship with my spouse, or is it taking me away? On our way out today, some of the leaders in our church will be handing out some additional notes that we've prepared, purely because we haven't got time to go through it all today, and I urge you to read this. There are some excellent resources on how to put the needed boundaries in place that will be right for you. And then there is intersections in 2 weeks' time. And all of you who are perhaps the young people, I urge you to be there. So all I can say to you is just be there. Listen to what is being said and make choices that are going to head your life in the right direction. The third issue with go and sin no more is that it implies, and indeed I think it requires, a cleanup for what has gone before. The Bible invites us to confess our sins, to acknowledge them to the people we have affected, indicating a genuine sorrow for the ways that we have hurt people. What does it mean? If I have had a sexual encounter with someone else while married, then I have a responsibility to my spouse to confess what I have done, to seek their forgiveness and their help to never be unfaithful again. Now, as you can imagine, there is a big risk in doing that, but it must be done. Firstly, you have broken the marriage covenant that you made with your spouse those many years ago. They have the right to end the marriage contract with you. The Bible makes that very clear. A spouse is free to leave the marriage where unfaithfulness has occurred. Now, I do not believe that the Bible suggests, and I don't suggest that that is the recommended course of action for a spouse to take. I personally believe, and it's affirmed by many situations that I have seen, that if a spouse chooses the path of forgiveness, remaining in the marriage, that both parties will be better off in the future. However, there are times when the person who has committed the adultery continues on to have an affair after affair. It may indicate that they're not truly sorry, but whatever the spouse perhaps should end the relationship for good. Everything that we're talking about this morning, every situation is different. Even God, He doesn't set out any hard and fast rules. He says every situation needs to be considered and acted upon based on the circumstances. And this is where prayer and hearing God's word is absolutely essential. The point I'm making here is that if you have had sex with someone else, you definitely do have a responsibility to acknowledge your wrongdoing to your spouse. And this will almost certainly require renewed efforts to slowly win back the trust of your spouse. They've been deeply betrayed and hurt by you, and healing is going to take time, maybe a very long time. But it is your responsibility, not theirs, to win them over again. Just a few weeks ago, we heard Pete tell his story in the church. I don't know if he's here today, but I want to affirm what Pete did in the church a few weeks back. His courage in being willing to tell the whole church of his life and experience. We need to hear people's stories. We need to hear the pain, the confession, the desire to do what is right. And I thank Pete for doing the right thing in our church and being willing to be a real man and to stand up and say it for what it really is. I hope and pray that his lead will give others the courage to be honest in our church too. So to summarize the second half of the message today, God does not condemn you, but He gives a clear instruction and He says, go and sin no more. Make a choice to live your life in a way that will honor and bless the people who are closest to you. Make a choice to honor the marriage covenant that you once made or that you will make in the future. To finish up with, I want to make an appeal. And this is not the kind of appeal where you have to stand up or where you walk up to the front of the church. The kind of appeal that I am inviting you to make this morning is an appeal to your mind. It's an appeal to your thinking. I'm appealing to you to make some life choices. And these life choices may result in you having to stand up and have some backbone and being a real man or a courageous woman, as the case might be. This appeal may result in you walking not to the front of the church, but walking up to a person that you have hurt and choosing to make it right and do the right thing. It's a very specific four-part appeal which I'm asking of you and which I'm responding to myself, because none of us is without sin in this area, and every single one of us need to make these choices going forward. Firstly, I'm appealing for you to make a choice in your heart and mind today to save sex only for marriage, as we've talked about at the beginning. It's a choice regardless of your marriage status, whether you're already married, whether you are not yet married, whether you have been married in the past. From this day forward, I will choose to only have sex with the person I am married to, within the marriage covenant relationship as God intended for my own good. And together with this is an appeal to those of us who are married that we hold our spouses accountable in the same way. Will you make that commitment with me today? This is the most important of the four appeals, and it relates to every single one of us. You have to make this commitment before you can move on to any of the other three. And I urge you to make a solemn covenant that you will choose to save sex for marriage only. Now, I recognize that this is a big ask, but I believe that God invites us to it because it is the best ask for our own good. Secondly, I am appealing for you to confess and own up to the mistakes of the past, both to God and to the people who are affected. The people who you may have affected are as follows: your spouse, your children, your affair partner. Seek wisdom and counsel about how to deal with a situation wisely. But I'm appealing for you to be repentant, very sorry, to genuinely confess your sorrow to the people who you have hurt, regardless of the consequences to you or to your reputation. Be a God-honoring man or woman and choose to do the right thing. Will you make a decision to confess and own up to your mistakes of the past? I appeal to you in the strongest possible terms to do that and to do it soon. Thirdly, I am making an appeal to those of you who are sexually addicted. Don't try and pretend that you're not. If you are, you will know it. Seek help today or at the earliest time that you possibly can. We're going to put on the website some places that you can seek help. This will be there on Monday morning, but Katie's been away this week. The appeal is for you to seek help in a group setting. I really want to urge you to consider that because groups are the way that it works best. Now, I know again that it's acknowledging your mistakes in your past to more people. But when you get together in a group situation, there is much greater chance of receiving help and benefit for the future. We are offering groups in this church dealing with sexual addiction because it is so important and because the church is the hospital for sinners. Now for the last one. I'm appealing to you not individually, but as a group, as a church, as the Papster Church family. I'm appealing to us as a whole church family to support and help each other as a God-honoring community to live God's way. What does it mean? Firstly, it means to respond as Jesus did when we find out about someone who is committing adultery. Neither do we condemn you. Go and sin no more. Adultery is not a cause for gossip, is it? Adultery is a cause for compassion and to assist in the healing process, in the restoration process. Are we going to be a church that is that kind of a community? Is this church going to be a safe place for people to acknowledge their mistakes and a place where we can receive help together? If you would like our church to be a place that does not condemn other people, I am going to ask you to stand up. As a group, do you want this church to be a place that does not condemn other people when we find ourselves in this situation? If you would like our church to be a place where people are not condemned, just please stand up now, and I'll tell you the reason why. For the people who need to confess, need to know that this is a safe place where this can happen. And I want to thank you for being the kind of church where this can happen, where people can be honest and openly admit what they have done wrong and seek help that they may be able to live God's way going forward. You know what this also means is that we must become a place where we can help people to go and sin no more. If you need help today, please come and speak to someone in this church. Come and speak to Leanne or I. We promise you that we will treat you confidentially. We will not condemn you, but we will urge you to do the right thing and to go and sin no more. Speak to Warwick or Bridget. They lead out in family ministries in our church. Or to Norman, to one of the staff, and do the right thing. Speak to someone you respect, someone you trust, and get help to live your life in a manner that will not cause pain or suffering to anyone else, to the people who are closest to you. I want to thank you, church, for being a community of people who are a hospital for sinners, a place where we can help each other. And as a parent of 3 daughters who are living through these real issues, right at this time, I care deeply that my daughters will live out their lives in this way that they will not be affected by the pain and suffering that comes from this. But you know what? As a leader in this church, I care deeply about every one of our daughters. I want the absolute best for each and every daughter in this church family. I want the absolute best for each of our sons in this family. I care deeply about them, and I want every son to represent God's unfailing and unconditional love to our daughters, and vice versa. These are all our children too. Church, we live or die in this together. And I hope and pray that we sense the weight of responsibility that rests on every single one of us to be the help that other people need, to give wise counsel. May we speak up when necessary. May we give wise counsel when needed, and help to save each other from the pain and suffering of taking the wrong road on this most important issue. Thank you for standing up today, and you can be seated now. Thank you for being a real and true community of God's followers. As I said at the beginning, I love this church. I love this place, every one of you. And now may we live under the protective wings of our great God, our Saviour, from sexual sin as from all of the others, the one who speaks to each and every one of us today and says the words that we all so need to hear. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.